David and Laura Starbuck were the couple everyone admired, beautiful, successful, and devoted to their children. But when their perfect suburban life ended in a scene of unimaginable horror, the truth that emerged revealed a darkness far more terrifying than anyone could have guessed. The Starbuck family lived in a quiet suburb of Maplewood, where every lawn was trimmed and every mailbox looked the same. From the outside, their two-story home seemed like the perfect symbol of suburban happiness. David Starbuck, the father, was an architect known for his creative designs and calm demeanor. He often left for work before sunrise and returned late in the evening, tired but proud of the life he had built. His wife Laura ran a small bakery just a few blocks away, famous for its cinnamon rolls and homemade pies. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who sent cookies to new neighbors, and who always had a smile that could soften any heart. Together they had 3 children, Michael, aged 12, Noah, aged 9, and the youngest, Lily, just 6. The family's life looked beautiful from every angle, the kind that people admired but rarely questioned. Every morning followed the same peaceful rhythm. David would sip his coffee while reading the newspaper at the kitchen counter. Laura would pack lunches for the kids, humming softly to herself. The children would bicker over who got the front seat on the way to school, filling the house with the kind of noise that only happy families make. On weekends, they hosted barbecues for neighbors, complete with fairy lights strung across the backyard and music that carried into the warm summer nights. They smiled for every photo, hugged for every occasion, and laughed just enough to convince the world that nothing could ever go wrong behind those bright white walls. But perfection often hides its cracks. Those who knew the family well had started noticing small changes in the months leading up to that November morning. David had become distant, his once easy charm replaced by quiet frustration. He stopped attending the neighborhood gatherings and spent long hours locked in his study. Laura's cheerfulness seemed strained. She had developed a habit of glancing over her shoulder as if something or someone was constantly on her mind. The children, once loud and carefree, began keeping to themselves. Teachers noted that Michael's grades had slipped and that Noah seemed withdrawn in class. No one thought much of it. Families go through hard times, they said. Every home has its secrets. When November arrived, the air turned cold and crisp, the trees shedding their last golden leaves. Thanksgiving was just around the corner, and the Starbucks had promised to host their annual dinner. Neighbors saw Laura shopping for decorations and David carrying firewood into the garage. Nothing seemed unusual. Then came the morning that would change Maplewood forever. It was a Sunday. The streets were quiet except for the sound of wind rustling through the trees. By noon, a faint smell of smoke began to drift from the Starbuck residence. At first, the neighbors thought it was a fireplace burning too strong, but the scent grew sharper. Something chemical, something wrong. When no one answered the door, a concerned neighbor called the police. When officers arrived, they found the front door locked but the curtains drawn tight. The family car sat untouched in the driveway and the lights inside flickered faintly. As they broke open the door, a thick, acrid scent filled the air. The house was unnaturally silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and alive. What they found inside would later be described as one of the most disturbing scenes in Maplewood's history. The Starbuck family, beloved, admired, and seemingly perfect, was gone. The once bright, welcoming home now stood as a hollow shell of tragedy. The walls that had echoed with laughter only days before were now soaked in horror. No one could have imagined that the smiling couple who waved from their porch, who baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, were about to become the center of a story that would shock the entire world. And as news spread across town, one haunting question lingered in everyone's mind. How could something so horrific happen to a family that had everything? Inside the Starbuck residence, the calm beauty of suburban life had turned into a crime scene that no one could have imagined. The moment officers stepped through the door, they were met with a strange stillness. The television was on, showing a children's cartoon frozen on the screen, and a pot of soup simmered quietly on the stove, filling the air with a faint scent of herbs mixed with something darker, the lingering odor of smoke and death. It was as though time itself had stopped in that house. The dining table was neatly set for 5, plates arranged with precision, glasses half full of juice. But the people who should have been sitting there were nowhere to be found alive. The discovery was devastating. In the living room, investigators found the bodies of David, Laura, and 2 of their children, Michael and Noah. Their faces were peaceful, as if they had simply fallen asleep, but the reality was far more horrifying. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no forced entry. Everything appeared untouched, almost staged. The only thing out of place was a message written on the refrigerator in what looked like red marker. "We all make mistakes." It sent a chill through every officer present. The smallest detail, its placement, its calm handwriting, made it feel personal, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. One name was missing from the list of victims: Lily, the youngest. At first, police feared she had been taken by whoever committed the murders. Her bedroom showed signs that someone had been there recently. Her blanket was missing and her favorite stuffed rabbit was gone. Yet nothing else suggested a struggle or break-in. All windows were locked from the inside, and there were no footprints outside the house other than those belonging to family members. It was as though Lily had simply vanished into thin air. The news spread through Maplewood like wildfire. Reporters flooded the quiet neighborhood, their cameras flashing as they tried to capture every possible angle of the tragedy. Residents gathered on sidewalks, whispering theories about what could have happened. Some believed it was a robbery gone wrong, though that didn't explain why nothing valuable had been taken. Others suspected that someone close to the family was responsible. Everyone agreed on one thing: the Starbucks weren't just victims. There was something deeply wrong beneath the surface of their perfect image. Investigators started piecing together the family's recent history. Financial records showed that David's once successful architecture firm had been facing bankruptcy. Lawsuits from former clients hinted at mismanagement and deceit. Laura's bakery, once bustling, had quietly gone up for sale weeks before the murders. On social media, however, the couple had continued to post cheerful updates. Pictures of Lily's school recital, a new cake recipe, a smiling selfie of David at his office. To outsiders, everything looked normal, but the truth was beginning to show itself in fragments. Detectives found that David had recently purchased a large life insurance policy worth nearly $2 million. The document named him as the sole beneficiary, and it had been signed just 2 months before the killings. When questioned, his business partner admitted that David had seemed increasingly anxious and withdrawn, often muttering that everything was about to collapse. It was becoming clear that the man admired for his stability might have been on the verge of losing everything. Still, there was one fact that didn't fit the pattern. David's own body was among the victims. If he had planned the murders for insurance money, why would he end his own life too? The medical examiner's report complicated things further. While Laura and the children had died from a fast-acting poison, David's cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. The gun was found near his hand, but no fingerprints were recovered. The position of the wound didn't match that of a typical suicide. Someone else might have pulled the trigger. As days passed, the mystery deepened. The media began calling it the Maplewood Massacre, and the town's peaceful image dissolved into suspicion and fear. Parents locked their doors earlier. Strangers became threats. Everyone wanted to know who could destroy a family so completely, and why one little girl was still missing. But among all the unanswered questions, one haunting detail remained: the message on the refrigerator. Its words seemed less like an explanation and more like a confession. Whoever had written it wanted the world to know something, but what that message truly meant was still buried beneath layers of lies, fear, and betrayal. As the investigation into the Starbuck murders continued, every lead seemed to twist into another mystery. Detectives combed through the home for days, collecting evidence and searching for any sign of the missing child. The house had turned from a family sanctuary into a maze of unanswered questions. Forensics experts noticed faint traces of gasoline near the living room carpet, suggesting that someone had tried to start a fire, but it hadn't spread far enough to destroy the evidence. The attempt seemed calculated, just enough to cover up certain details, not enough to burn the entire house. Whoever planned this knew what they were doing. In the rubble, investigators discovered something that changed the direction of the case. Hidden inside a smoke detector above the kitchen was a small camera. The footage it contained was damaged by heat but partially recoverable. The video showed the Starbuck family on the night of the murders. David was pacing near the counter, visibly tense. Laura sat at the kitchen table, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her eyes following him as he muttered under his breath. At one point, David poured wine into 2 glasses and slid one toward her. She hesitated before taking a sip. Minutes later, her body slumped forward onto the table. The camera flickered and then the recording ended abruptly. That footage was enough to confirm what investigators had started to suspect: poison. Lab results later verified that Laura and the 2 boys had been poisoned with a fast-acting sedative mixed with cyanide. But what didn't make sense was David's death. He had been shot, execution style, the bullet entering from an angle impossible for self-infliction. That revelation shattered the theory that David had killed his family and then himself. There had to be someone else in that house that night. The search for suspects widened. Police began looking into family connections and found one person who stood out: Laura's estranged brother, Ethan Monroe. He was a former construction worker with a history of mental instability and a record of minor theft. He had lived with the Starbucks briefly years earlier, but left after a bitter argument with David. Neighbors recalled seeing a rusted blue truck parked near the Starbuck house a few days before the murders, matching the description of Ethan's vehicle. When investigators went to question him, he was gone. His home was empty, his phone disconnected, his belongings abandoned. Media outlets seized the new development, painting Ethan as a violent drifter seeking revenge. The public found the idea believable, an unstable man returning to settle a personal grudge. But the detectives who studied the case weren't so sure. If Ethan had murdered the Starbucks, why leave behind the life insurance papers pointing to David's motive? Why spare Lily if she was indeed still alive? The puzzle didn't fit neatly, and every answer only opened another question. Further examination of David's financial records revealed another disturbing layer. His company's bank account had multiple unexplained transfers to an offshore account. Someone had been draining money for months, and the transactions began shortly after Ethan reappeared in town. Investigators considered the possibility that Ethan might have been blackmailing David. If true, it meant the relationship between them had reignited before the murders, perhaps turning deadly once greed and desperation collided. As the weeks passed, sightings of Ethan began surfacing in neighboring states, always vague and unconfirmed. A man matching his description was seen buying fuel at a rural gas station, another at a motel in Oregon. But every lead ended in frustration. The missing girl, Lily, remained the key to everything. Detectives believed that if she were alive, she had seen what truly happened that night. Her small presence had become the heart of the investigation, a faint hope in a story filled with darkness. Then came another revelation. A burned notebook was found in the remains of David's office. Some of the pages were still legible. Among architectural sketches were personal notes that seemed like a diary. In one entry, David wrote, "He knows everything. I can't hide this any longer. If he talks, it's over." The handwriting was unmistakably his. The he mentioned in the note could only be Ethan. The word suggested a deep fear, not of losing money or reputation, but of exposure. something that could destroy his family completely. By the end of the third month, the picture had become both clearer and more terrifying. The evidence suggested three things. David had poisoned his family, Ethan had been present that night, and someone had fired the gun that killed David. Whether Ethan was a savior, an accomplice, or the executioner, no one knew. All that was certain was that the perfect image of the Starbuck family had been built on deception, and the truth was still out there, somewhere with a frightened little girl who had vanished without a trace. 2 months after the tragedy, the Starbuck case had grown cold. Public attention began to fade, but detectives working behind the scenes refused to let it rest. Every morning they combed through new reports, tips, and false sightings of the missing child Lily. None of them led anywhere. The house where the family once lived was now sealed off with police tape, its once bright windows covered in dust. Maplewood, a town once known for its safety, had become a place people locked their doors before sunset. The Starbucks were no longer just a family. They had become a legend of horror whispered at dinner tables and schoolyards alike. Then, on a misty morning in early February, a hiker in northern Oregon stumbled upon an old cabin hidden deep in the woods. The structure looked abandoned, but inside it told a different story. A small bed made of blankets lay in the corner beside a collection of children's drawings taped to the wall. Stick figures of a man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands under a yellow sun. Near the bed sat a pink backpack embroidered with the name Lily Starbuck. It was dirty and torn, but unmistakably hers. Police arrived within hours, combing through the area for clues. The cabin contained traces of recently extinguished fires and empty food cans, suggesting someone had been living there for weeks. Forensic tests confirmed Lily's presence, but there was no sign of her or anyone else. A nearby gas station provided the first real breakthrough. Surveillance footage showed a man resembling Ethan Monroe buying groceries a few weeks earlier. He wasn't alone. With him was a small girl who appeared frightened, clutching his jacket tightly. The footage reignited the investigation and sent a shockwave through the media. Was Ethan the killer who had escaped with the only surviving witness? Or had he saved Lily from something even worse? Authorities launched a multi-state manhunt. Posters bearing Lily's face appeared in every major city, and Ethan's photo was broadcast nationwide. For the first time since the murders, there was real hope that the missing child might still be alive. Weeks later, the breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A motel manager in a remote Oregon logging town recognized Ethan's photo and alerted the police. He had been renting a cabin under a false name, paying in cash and keeping to himself. When officers arrived, the cabin was eerily quiet. Inside, they found stacks of newspapers and clippings about the Starbuck murders, as well as handwritten notes scattered across a table. Some were angry ramblings. Others appeared to be letters addressed to Lily, explaining that he had to do what was right. There was no sign of the girl. Ethan was found in the woods behind the cabin, dead from an apparent suicide. He had left behind a short note that read only 3 words: "She knows everything." That message puzzled investigators. What did Lily know? And if she was still alive, where had she gone? A full forensic sweep of the area revealed a trail of small footprints leading down to a nearby river. It appeared that Lily had been with him until shortly before his death. Search teams spent days scouring the area, hoping to find a clue, perhaps a sign that she had escaped or been taken in by someone else. The story once again captured the world's attention, transforming from a simple case of domestic tragedy into a nationwide mystery of survival and guilt. Public opinion about Ethan shifted rapidly. Some saw him as a monster who murdered his sister's family. Others began to wonder if he was the only one who had tried to save the little girl. The notes in his cabin revealed a man haunted by something he had seen, something that had driven him to isolate himself from the world. In one half-burned entry he had written, They wouldn't have believed me. I did what I had to do. For investigators, one thing was clear. Lily had been alive long after the murders, and she had been with Ethan willingly. Whether she was running from the truth or being protected from it remained uncertain. Every road seemed to circle back to the same haunting conclusion. The youngest member of the Starbuck family held the answers to everything, and until she was found, no one could truly understand what had happened in that house on Maplewood Drive. 6 months after Ethan Monroe's death, the search for Lily Starbuck continued. Her disappearance had become both a mystery and a symbol, an image of innocence lost to unthinkable tragedy. The public had almost given up hope when, one overcast morning on the California coast, a truck driver spotted a barefoot girl walking along Highway 101. She was thin, her hair tangled, and her clothes faded with dirt. When the driver stopped and offered help, she didn't speak. She simply pointed to the word police printed on his jacket and nodded. It wasn't long before authorities confirmed the impossible. The little girl was Lily Starbuck, the sole survivor of the Maplewood murders. At first, Lily refused to talk. The trauma had locked her memories away behind silence. Doctors described her as fragile but intelligent, haunted by something she couldn't yet put into words. Weeks passed before she began to draw pictures instead of speaking. Images of her family, the house, the dinner table, and always a shadowy figure standing by the kitchen door. Gradually, her silence began to break. Piece by piece, her story emerged, and it was unlike anything the world had imagined. According to Lily, her parents had been fighting constantly in the days leading up to the murders. David had grown angry and withdrawn, spending hours in his office surrounded by papers and bills. Laura often cried when she thought the children weren't looking. On the night of the killings, dinner had started normally. Her father poured drinks, her mother smiled weakly, and her brothers joked as usual. But the laughter didn't last long. Her mother began coughing, then slumped forward. Her brothers followed soon after, their movements slowing as though falling asleep. Lily remembered being told to go upstairs just before it happened, but she didn't listen. She saw her father panic, shaking her mother and shouting words she didn't understand. Moments later, the sound of a gunshot echoed through the house. When she ran to the stairs, she saw her Uncle Ethan standing behind her father, holding a gun. Her father collapsed to the ground. Ethan dropped the weapon and turned toward her. He told her they had to leave, that she wasn't safe anymore. She remembered crying as he carried her out the back door, the house glowing faintly from the small fire David had tried to start. Her story matched the forensic evidence almost perfectly. The poison had been David's doing. The gunshot that killed him had come from Ethan's weapon, but not in malice, out of desperate intervention. Ethan hadn't been the villain the world believed him to be. He had come that night after receiving a message from Laura, a plea for help. When he arrived, the poisoning was already underway. He had shot David to stop him, but realized that saving the others was impossible. In panic, he took Lily, fearing that police would never believe his story because of his criminal past. For months, he hid her in isolated places, trying to keep her safe while battling guilt and paranoia. His final message, "She knows everything," now made sense. Lily had witnessed the truth he couldn't live to explain. When investigators pieced the events together, the full picture emerged at last. The Starbuck murders had been born from desperation, not hatred. David's business had collapsed under debt and fraud allegations, and his carefully constructed image was crumbling. Facing ruin, he convinced himself that ending everything was better than facing public humiliation. He poisoned his family out of a twisted sense of control, but Ethan's sudden arrival disrupted his plan. The perfect life David had fought to protect had become the very thing he destroyed. The story ended with quiet sorrow rather than justice. Lily was placed in the care of relatives far from Maplewood, shielded from the media and the dark fascination that surrounded her name. The Starbuck home was eventually sold, but no one ever stayed for long. Neighbors claimed strange sounds came from the empty house at night. The creak of footsteps, the faint hum of a lullaby Laura used to sing. Most people dismissed it as imagination, but for those who had followed the case, it was easier to believe the past refused to rest. In the years that followed, documentaries, books, and countless theories emerged about the Starbuck family. Some saw them as victims of circumstance, others as a warning about the illusion of perfection. But one truth endured: behind every flawless smile there can be a storm waiting to break. The Starbuck murders reminded the world that evil doesn't always arrive with strangers in the night. Sometimes it grows quietly inside the walls of a home that looks just like yours. And long after the headlines faded, Maplewood never forgot the family whose tragedy became a mirror of its own darkest fears.